You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is June 1st, 2025, and this is episode 317 of Lighthearted. Today we're going to hear a conversation about a unique artist's residency at a Connecticut lighthouse and a new related art exhibit. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. I'm recording this on May 22nd as I prepare to leave in 10 days for France. I'll be there for most of the month of June with the U.S. Lighthouse Society tour and also some time on my own. I am also preparing to be the MC at an event at the graveside of Ida Lewis in Newport, Rhode Island this Saturday. Because there's so much happening, I won't have a co-host for this episode. Today's interview concerns Peck Ledge Lighthouse near Norwalk, Connecticut on Long Island Sound. You'll see the lighthouse called Peck Ledge in some places and Pecks Ledge in others. I called it Pecks Ledge on my website and in my book on Connecticut lighthouses. And then a while back, a woman emailed me and she said something like, "How can you pretend to know anything about the lighthouse when you can't even get the name right? It's Peck, not Pecks." I thought she was being a little harsh. If you look back at government records, it's called both names at different times. They're pretty much interchangeable, and you'll hear both names in the interview. In the scheme of things, it's really not worth worrying too much about. Norwalk is in Fairfield County, Connecticut, on western Long Island Sound. It's considered part of the New York metropolitan area. Peck, or Pecks Ledge, is at the east end of the Norwalk Islands. A lighthouse was proposed in 1896 to mark the ledge. A lighthouse was built nearby at Green's Ledge in 1902, but the one at Peck Ledge didn't begin operation until 1906. It was the last staffed lighthouse to be built at a wave-swept site on Long Island Sound. Its life as a staff light was relatively short, though, only 27 years. It's a typical offshore light of the late 19th, early 20th century period, with a cylindrical cast iron foundation topped by a so-called spark plug type cast iron lighthouse. Under the provisions of the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act of 2000, the lighthouse was sold via online auction in September 2015 for a high bid of $235,000. As you'll hear in the interview, the owner is now Norwalk Art Space. The organization strives to increase arts access and opportunities for all. Today's conversation is with artist, writer, and curator Richard Klein. Richard has utilized found objects in his sculptural work since the late 1990s. He was involved for 30 years with the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where he curated nearly 100 exhibitions. In early September 2024, Richard spent a week at Peck Ledge Lighthouse, a residency that was sponsored by the Norwalk Art Space. Richard is also the curator of a new show at Norwalk Art Space. The show is called Sight and Sound Artists Consider Long Island Sound. It opens on June 12th and continues through August 28th. About the exhibition, Richard has written, "Long Island Sound is more than a collection of facts. It's a living and breathing entity that can't be measured in square miles or dollars." The artists in this exhibition have approached the subject from varied and complex directions, and the works they produced can only begin to expand our appreciation for the sound. I met Richard about a year ago when I visited Peck Ledge Light, and he happened to be there the same day. It was a pleasure meeting him then, and a pleasure chatting with him for the podcast. So let's listen to my conversation with Richard Klein now. I'm speaking today with artist Richard Klein, and thanks so much for doing this today, Richard. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And it was interesting meeting you last year, actually, when you came to Norwalk.
Let me ask you first a little bit about yourself. As an artist, what sort of art do you create?
That's a tricky question. Is that I've been an artist and also a curator I've been a curator since I was in my 30s and an artist since I was a teenager. And I work primarily with found materials. And the way I work is I find materials or objects that interest me. And usually they're things that everyone is aware of, familiar with, like eyeglasses, drinking glasses, common objects,
Yeah.
and I reconfigure them and create sculpture. I make sculpture that is made out of these objects. And just a little bit of a connection with lighthouses is that I'm very interested in light and transparency and reflection. And I've made a lot of work that deals with that by using old eyeglass lenses. I mirror objects like auto glass and common glass objects with white gold leaf to turn them into mirrors. And I think there's a relationship with lighthouses in a sense where I'm dealing with reflection, and I love Fresnel lenses too, which obviously are a big part of historically lighthouses.
Absolutely. I noticed among the objects you've used are light bulbs also, which sort of relate to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And incandescent light bulbs, which are obsolete, and it kind of attracted they're kind of iconic objects, but the technology has changed so rapidly in the last decade or two. They kind of fascinate me, and part of that history is that I grew up in New Jersey, and my parents took me to Thomas Edison's laboratory when I was a kid, which is a National Historic Site. I think it was the first experience in my life that led me into being an artist, where even though it was a scientific laboratory, I thought a lot of the experiments that Edison was doing and a lot of the way he worked was closer to art in some ways. Everything from the way he developed moving pictures, light bulbs, all of that just really fascinated me. Yeah. In fact, I built a tin foil, disc recording phonograph from plans that I got as a kid from the Thomas Edison Historical Site.
Oh, cool. Yeah, my wife and I visited that place some years ago. It's a museum now. I really enjoyed that. They still have his movie studio, I believe. What's it called?
Yeah, the Black Mariah. Right, yeah, the Black Mariah.
So also, you mentioned you've been a curator along with being an artist, and you're a curator for the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum. I think for quite a few years.
I retired 3 years ago now.
Okay.
After 30 years of working in the institution, and I don't use the retirement word, the R word, as I call it, because I'm busier than ever. I'm just doing different things. Yeah. It's like I really felt I was at a point in my life where I wanted to get away from the responsibilities of institutional life, of everything from the endless, relentless pressure to organize exhibitions, but also raising money, which, if you're in the nonprofit world, as you're well aware, is a huge thing, and budgeting and all of that. So it's been an interesting 3 years. And the one thing is, and my wife is very aware of this, is I have to learn to say no because I've been raising my hand and saying yes to too many things. Work I'm involved, other than the Norwalk Art Space, I'm involved in a number of other smaller nonprofit organizations that I feel a kinship with.
Yeah. Well, I share some of those same problems. I can't say no either. And also fundraising is my least favorite part of lighthouse preservation. I don't like to ask for money. So tell me, what is the Norwalk Art Space?
The Norwalk Art Space it was opened I'm trying to make sure I remember, in 2021. There was a woman, Alexandra Devon Corey, who lived in Westport, Connecticut, with her husband, Robin Panavka, and she was a corporate lawyer, but also very involved in civil rights law and social justice. But she also had a great interest in art and felt that there needed to be a resource for local artists. And there was this missing in Fairfield County. This Christian Science church that hadn't been a church in many, many years came up for sale. It was most recently, before they bought it, it was actually a carpet and Oriental carpet store. They bought it and renovated it, and several year process, and opened the Norwalk Art Space in 2021. And sadly, Alexandra passed away before it opened up. She was ill with cancer, and she never got to see it, her vision realized. But Robin Panavka, her husband, and their two children really took over the reins and saw the thing to completion, and it's been very successful in its first couple of years of 4 years now of existence. And I live in Norwalk, and I was invited to be on the advisory committee for the organization. The Lighthouse was given, I'm trying to remember what year, of 2023, the Lighthouse was given by Robin and his family to the Norwalk Art Space. And that was just at the point that I got involved in the advisory committee. And the idea was, perhaps it would be a great place for a residency. So there's been art activity out there. Most of it has been bringing artists out there for the day, but there hadn't been a residency. And the problem is that, as you're aware, Peck's Ledge is not on land. It's not
Yeah.
even an island. It just sticks out of the water. And getting there and getting off of it are a challenge. And also, the administrative overhead of running a residency program is pretty complicated. And the resources really aren't available right now at the Norwalk Art Space to do this continuously. But I would go to these meetings and raise my hand and say, we really need to think about the Lighthouse because it's such a great and unique thing. And there's such potential there. Well, finally, Robin, it was Duvian Montoya, who's executive director of the Norwalk Art Space, pointed at me one day and said, "How would you like to be the first artist in residence?" And I think he realized that I was pretty resourceful and self-organizing, and I could probably do something, be out there for a while without relatively low impact on the organization. So I was invited to do that early last year, and like I said, my residency was right after Labor Day of 2024. I was out there for a week, and that timing was chosen just because the sound would be quieter. It would, the summer was over, and all the pleasure boaters, most of them would be not going out on the sound.
We'll get back to that in a minute. But let me just, if we could clarify something, because I'm not totally clear on it. From what you say, would you say that Norwalk Art Space is the quote unquote official owners of the
Yes.
Lighthouse? Is that
Yes,
correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure that's entirely clear, like online. There's a website for Peck Ledge
It's not entirely clear, but it is true. And I think part of that is just, once again, we're in a holding pattern right now until we try to figure out what we want to do with the Lighthouse.
Sure.
And particularly now with, funding for the arts is so up in the air and it's so difficult to raise money. It's like there have been various ideas floated and various connections made with other institutions and organizations about co-managing the Lighthouse. And none of them have proved fruitful as of yet, but we're still working on that with the idea that it would be great to have a partner running this and to make it possible because, you're aware of issues with lighthouses and liability. I mean, just the liability insurance of owning the lighthouse is extreme.
Yeah, and you can get liability insurance, but as far as property insurance, it's hard to get anything now without spending millions of dollars or whatever to cover flood or anything.
The insurance on it is liability insurance.
Yeah. It's become prohibitively expensive to have property insurance on lighthouses now. So you spent a week at the Lighthouse, as you said. So what was that like? Well, let me ask you first, did you have decent weather during that week you're out there?
Beautiful weather, absolutely beautiful weather. It was interesting, though, that, Robin and his family put a new dock on the Lighthouse when they got it, because before it was literally this rusty ladder running down the side to the riprap, and you had to pull up your boat on the slippery seaweed covered riprap, grab this ladder and climb up it to a trap door. And it was, almost impossible for most, even a fairly athletic person to get onto it. So, he went through the part of the renovation of it was more complicated. One was getting the permitting done to put a dock on it. And there's a, fairly substantial steel dock on it. But even when I was out there one day, the wind was blowing pretty steadily, 20 miles an hour out of the east, straight down the sound. And it was rough out there, and it wasn't even a storm. And, at high tide, the water was sloshing up through the deck of the dock. And but the weather was, otherwise was beautiful. I mean, it was just a little windy.
Yeah.
We did have, we had a sea kayak. I was out there. I should say I wasn't by myself. And this was another issue about liability was Robin and Duvian, felt like it was a little risky for me being out there by myself. Like what if some emergency happened? So they said, it would be better if you were out there with someone. So I enlisted my good friend, the artist Ward Shelley, who splits his time between Florida and Easton, Connecticut, who's an accomplished sailor and also kind of person who could he loves camping, and he's the kind of person who would be perfect to be in the lighthouse with as my compatriot while I was out there. And it was actually fantastic to have him out there with me. So
Yeah.
he was riding shotgun while I was there.
Did I see somewhere that he played guitar as well?
He did play guitar.
I think
He
it said
does.
something he sort of serenaded you to sleep at night.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ward had done, it was interesting. He did a project many years ago where he made all these flags for each of the islands in New York Harbor that were kind of like these small islands that people didn't really pay attention to. And he had never shown this work, and they were all on a rope, and we stretched the rope between the railing on the deck up to the top of the lighthouse. So we had these flags flying while we were there to kind of announce our presence. And a lot of people, it was interesting. People were very curious about what was going on there because suddenly, oh, there's people out there all the time, and there's flags flying on it. Like, what's happening?
Yeah. Boy, what a change for the lighthouses in that area. Green's Ledge. People, regular listeners to the podcast know I've had Tim Petty, the owner of Green's Ledge, Light on before, and it's amazing what's been done there. But both of those lighthouses were pretty much abandoned. I mean, they still have active lights maintained by the Coast Guard, but the buildings hadn't been maintained. Stamford Harbor Light also still in bad shape, but now privately owned and being restored. So really the lighthouses in that area are coming back to life, which is great.
When Robin and Alexandra got the lighthouse, I mean, they did renovate it the inside. And I think the difference with Green's Ledge is they just blew out the inside. They cleaned it out.
Yeah.
And, originally it was 5 levels, including, what do you call it? The lantern room. Is that what you call it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they took out, when you go in off the deck, which is the second floor, or second level, they blew out the ceiling between the second and third level to give a double height space, which is fantastic because it just is so airy and open in there. And it's really a brilliant solution to how to kind of clean up the inside of it.
Oh, it's great. Both of those lighthouses, I was so impressed by what's been done. So how would you say spending your week there at the lighthouse, or would you say it gave you a new perspective on Long Island Sound?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've lived most of my life within a dozen miles of the Sound. I've gone swimming in the Sound. I swim in the Sound fairly regularly. I go boating on it a couple times a summer. I have friends with sailboats. I've gone fishing in the Sound, not for a long time, but it was interesting living near the Sound and just taking it for granted. And when I started thinking about being in the lighthouse and also talking to people, I realized like how many people take Long Island Sound completely for granted. And there's just a huge population living along the Sound. And that's one of the challenges, obviously, environmentally, was the growth of Connecticut and Long Island over the years. And, the fact that the Sound isn't flushed completely by the tides. But I hadn't really thought about the Sound. And I love doing projects as a curator where I'm finding out something that I don't know about, like going a deep dive into a subject I don't know about, and no pun intended, deep dive with Long Island Sound. But I started thinking about it. I said, this is really interesting. There's this body of water literally in my backyard, and I don't know that much about it. So, I decided, like, instead of making art myself about the Sound, it was like I was going to organize an exhibition about it and find out how artists were thinking about it. And I wanted the artists all to live in the watershed of the Sound. So my time out there was, I spent most of my time just trying to be there and not think about things, or continuing my research. There was a nice cell phone signal out there. So I did bring, I got a solar panel and a battery backup for my laptop. So I was able to go online, and I just, started writing, which, a lot of the text that ended up being the publication that's accompanying the exhibition, which you've seen. Started writing it out there, but, communicating with various people. And the challenge was that, the catalog is, the publication is 60 pages long, but I realized when I started working on this could be several 100-page book. And I had to pick and choose my little introductory essay about what I wrote about Peck's Ledge and the Sound. There was a lot of editorial work on cutting that down to size, because when I first wrote it, it was like twice as long. But most of the time was spent out there just trying to be there and try to experience it. Our lives are so mediated now by looking at our phones and doing this and doing that. And I had a little bit of a rhythm where I would get up early in the morning before the sun rose and just sit outside and watch the day unfold. and generally, spend maybe two hours a day writing, from 10 until noon. But then the rest of the time, once again, was just trying to be there and really take in the environment. And, I guess you asked about the weather when I was there. My big disappointment was I did want to be there when there was a storm.
Yeah.
And to experience the full experience of being in the sound. And, as you know, I wrote in the publication is that Superstorm Sandy, the cast iron deck of Peck's Ledge is 13, 14 feet above high tide level. And some of those plates were blown away by waves in Superstorm Sandy, which I found amazing when I was there, to think about that the sound was that active, was that rough
Yeah.
during that
Yeah.
storm.
I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. I know that Sandy, which was 2012, right, destroyed a lighthouse in New York Harbor. The Old Orchard Shoal light just wiped it off the base. It was a pretty serious storm, obviously. When you were there, was it ever on your mind just thinking about the keepers who lived there year round years
Oh,
ago?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that, and Ward and I explored the lighthouse, especially what I call the basement, the lower floor, to try to figure out their traces. It's like, there's a coal chute. Like obviously at one time they had coal heat, and there's a coal chute going down to a room which I think was where the coal was kept. And
Yeah.
there's a cast iron or cast cement thing with some bolts sticking out of it. And I think probably there was a generator put there at one point when the lighthouse was automated. So kind of looking into that and thinking about the people living there. And then there's the story, which I didn't repeat in the publication, about that lighthouse keeper just around World War One, or just before World War One, who started a fire
Yep.
where he was heating some tar up near the stove, and he went to check a buoy that had I guess it was some sort of bell or something on a buoy, and it wasn't working right. He rowed out to it and saw smoke coming from the window and rowed back. And thankfully, he was able to put the fire out with some buckets of seawater and blankets.
Yeah.
Did minimal damage. But
Yeah.
I would love to know, these characters, these people who stayed in the lighthouse, their lives, and what it must have been like. And especially if you go back further. I mean, Peck's Ledge, in 1906, but people who were lighthouse keepers in the 19th century, especially if you're way out there. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been, I've never been like a credible lighthouse fancier, but I have visited lighthouses. And when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey, where my family spent time at Long Beach Island. So Barnegat Light was
Yeah.
like a huge thing in my childhood. I never went into it, but it left an impression on me. And I think the most spectacular lighthouse I've ever visited was in Ireland on Skellig Michael. And my wife and I went out to Skellig Michael, I believe, in 1993, and it was
Mm-hmm.
before it was considered a World Heritage Site, and you could just get you paid fishermen to take you out there for the day, and
Yeah.
went in the lighthouse. They were doing some work, and the door was open, and I went inside that lighthouse, and once
Uh,
again, that's a pretty big lighthouse, and they were saying how most winters, some of the glass at the top where the lantern room is, some of it, quite often it's blown out in the wintertime. And that's probably, I want to say 100 feet above, it's 100 feet above the tide line. Like,
yeah.
thinking about waves in the North Atlantic hitting Skellig
Yeah.
Michael.
Yeah, I actually interviewed a guy who was a keeper there, Gerald Butler. He was a keeper at several Irish lighthouses, including Fastnet, the very famous
Oh,
lighthouse
right,
off the
right.
southern end. He was there in the Fastnet disaster, yachting disaster in 1979. That was quite famous. But he was at Skellig Michael for a while, so I was lucky enough to meet him when I was in Ireland. We did not. I was with the U.S. Lighthouse Society tour. We didn't get to Skellig Michael, but we saw a few dozen lighthouses in Ireland. What an amazing
It was
coastline.
funny. We went out there not for the lighthouse, but to see the ruins. The Irish monks that lived out there and built terrace farming, and on the top there's fresh water, a spring of fresh water. Like how this is iceberg of rocks sticking out of the North Atlantic, and there's fresh water on the top of it. Like, how does that work?
So back to your residency there. You mentioned that you were the first. Uh, did the first residency at the lighthouse. Are you the only one at this point? Has there been anybody else, or are there plans for anybody else?
We're talking about the idea of maybe doing this once a year, but once again, trying to figure out how to do this, and also having the artist be the right fit. because not just anyone could stay out there. I mean, one thing your listeners should understand, and I think is that the place is beautifully restored, other than the fact there's no electricity, no running water, no bathroom. I'm used to camping, and Ward is used to camping. We brought a boat toilet out there, which was fine for the week. We brought bottled water. We brought a camp stove. It was, pretty luxurious. I mean, actually,
Yeah.
I slept on the floor on an air mattress in a sleeping bag, and was, totally comfortable the entire time I was out there. It would be rough to be out there, I mean, in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Or when the weather was cold.
Well, that's what's so amazing about, like we were talking about, keepers at places like that year round. And you mentioned coal. They would have had a coal stove for cooking, but also for heat, probably with the pipe like running up through the floors for their heat, which probably wasn't adequate. But it's amazing that they lived at those places. So moving on here, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is that you are the curator for a new exhibition at the Norwalk Art Space called Sight and Sound: Artists Consider Long Island Sound. So what was the genesis of this show? Is it really, was the idea, did the idea come about before you stayed at the Lighthouse, or did it kind of happen partly because of your stay there?
It was before,
Mm-hmm.
because when I make art, it requires like an experience to sink in. Like, I'm not the sort of artist who would go out there with a sketch pad and do some sketching of oyster boats passing. It's like I needed to experience. And then I realized, like, my background as a curator, and also the nature of the Norwalk Art Space itself, would it be interesting to do something that really connected the Norwalk Art Space with the Lighthouse? And I just thought, oh, well, let's do an exhibition. Like, are there artists making work about the sound?
Yeah.
And, I was aware of a couple people, but, I said I wanted to, it was a research project essentially to kind of look around. My only regret is that I did go out to Long Island, but there are no artists from Long Island. They're all either from Connecticut or New York City.
Hmm.
And that had a lot to do with, there were two artists under consideration from Long Island, but for logistical reasons, I couldn't include them in the show. But then my rationale is the watershed of the sound only includes a very narrow strip of the North Shore of Long Island, because most of the water on Long Island flows south into the Atlantic, or east to kind of, over towards Shelter Island, that area. So I guess I'm rationalizing there. But one thing I did do, which was really interesting, and you're probably aware of this, I went out and visited Randy Palumbo's lighthouse.
I was just going to mention him. That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was fascinated with that. I had never met the man, and so I did go out there. Actually, after my residency at Peck's Ledge, I was out
Just
there.
I'm sorry to interrupt for a second. You're talking about Orient Point Lighthouse, officially in New York waters. You can see it from New London, Connecticut, right? But yeah, Randy's been on the podcast as well. Yeah. I was going to say that's the only other lighthouse I'm aware of, very similar, another so-called spark plug type lighthouse that's had artists' residencies. So,
Yeah, no, the way that's run, it's like Randy. My understanding is that it's more like he runs into people or finds people that he thinks would be, could stay out there. And like
yeah.
when I visited, actually was at the end of the season. They were about to close it up for the winter, and there was a writer that I believe was from the Hamptons who Randy knew, who was going to be out there for a couple of days. And that he has electricity, a composting toilet. It's pretty. You could be out there for a considerable length of time.
Yeah. Well, I led a U.S. Lighthouse Society Long Island tour a couple of years ago, and we did a cruise where we went close to Orient Point Lighthouse, and there were, I think it was a couple. I believe it was a man and a woman staying there when we got close, and they came out and they're waving to us. They're excited to see a tour boat coming close to the lighthouse, I think. So that's pretty neat what he's done there.
As you know, the Coast Guard is very particular about what you do on the outside of the lighthouses. And Randy built that weird mirrored object that
Yes.
rotated with like a mirrored ball. And
Yes.
the Coast Guard did not like that, my understanding.
I'm not surprised.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I that was there when I was there.
Well,
Anyway.
with Peck's Ledge, there were discussions like, wouldn't it be interesting to have an artist do like a mural on it or something? And it's like, it can't be done,
No.
Can't be done.
No. Yeah, absolutely right. Not only the Coast Guard, but I think the State Historic Preservation Office might
Right.
frown on that as well. So back to the exhibition. Can you say a little bit more about the artists? I was looking at the catalog you sent me, and it looks pretty varied, the types of art that are included. So maybe you could comment on that a little bit, the artists and
Well,
the art.
I'm the sort of curator, and I work in the world of contemporary art. So living artists is like from the very beginning, I wanted a real variety of approaches to thinking about the sound. That was the goal. I mean, there are, depending on how you count the list, because there are two of the artists that are, Marion Bellinger and Martha Willett Lewis are two artists that collaborate together. So I'm calling them one person. And Christopher Coffin, who's an interesting artist, he did one piece, a video piece that he collaborated with a friend of his, Jeremy Slater, on the sound, kind of the texture of the sound with the piece. They took the ambient sound and altered it and turned it in kind of into music in a way.
Hmm.
So there's if you count the pairs, there's 12 artists in the show. And
Yeah.
at one time, there were almost 25 artists on the list of people who I was considering. But given the size of the Norwalk Art Space and the fact that I really wanted each artist to be represented with more than one work of art to kind of give the viewer an understanding of what the work's all about, it was like I knew that it was going to be 10, 12 artists, maximum in the show.
Yeah.
And then, just talking to people, going to the art grapevine of trying to figure out, what's out there, what are people making that's interesting.
Yeah. And it all relates in one way or another to the sound. And I was looking at, I mean, it relates in different ways, right? Some of it's nature, some of it's the wildlife. Some are is boats, marine type things. Some of it's obviously kind of abstract.
Well, the two artists that I would say are abstract. There's Frances Ashforth, who lives in New Canaan, Connecticut, and she grew up on the Sound in Westport. And the nature of the light and the space of the sound had a huge impact on her as an artist. And the idea that you could always see Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the ocean or salt water and you're looking out and you don't see something. You see a horizon line, but that sense of space really affected her as an artist. And most of her work is landscape oriented. And to this day, when she creates a work of art, she always starts with the horizon. Interestingly enough, and it's because of that sense of the horizon that you get from the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And she's representing the show by two different bodies of work. One is abstract in a sense, but they're monoprints that are these beautiful blue monoprints that are seascapes, but they're created in the printmaking studio, not looking at the ocean, but thinking about the ocean and that sense of light and space. They clearly are seascapes, but they're not representative of a specific place.
Right.
And then she has these drawings she's done of beach rocks from Westport. And, that was something that interested me a great deal. I have a particular interest in natural history and the geologic history of New England, but Long Island Sound is, a new thing on the face of North America, really created by the last ice age. And it's interesting that both Frances Ashforth has done drawings of rocks, these very representational drawings of rocks, but Christopher Coffin is another artist who his work is kind of abstract too, but I'll explain it in a moment. But he did these cyanotypes where he collected rocks from the various places that were the departure points for these long distance swims and paddle boards in the Sound, and their shadows. He put them on paper that was sensitized with the cyanotype solution and created these images of rocks that are the shadows of the rocks from these locations on the Sound.
Yeah.
His work is interesting because he grew up as a lifeguard on Long Island, and he now lives in Connecticut. And his art is actually performative, where he does these long distance swims and paddle boards that he records the routes on his Garmin watch, and then creates drawings based on those trips. And then the drawings are transferred once again into cyanotype, which are blue, which obviously represent the water, or talk about the ocean.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating.
I wanted everyone to live in the watershed of the Sound, and it was a great debate about New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And then starting to understand like how the East River is not a river. Everyone calls the East. It's a tidal, channel. and how much water actually does go into the eastern end of the sound, or goes through the eastern end of the sound into the East River and then ultimately into the Hudson. Uh,
Hmm.
it was kind of surprising to me, but Duke Riley, who's an artist who lives in New York City, he did a work of art about Hellgate, which is the channel, that goes into the East River from the Harlem, where the Harlem River comes and the East River come together. He did a work of art, a map-like piece about that. But he also had a residency on Fisher's Island. There's a pretty active, they call Lighthouse works, even though they're not staying in the lighthouse on Fisher's Island. There's an artist residency there. And he spent some time a number of years ago on Fisher's Island and did a beautiful video about this woman who picks up trash on the beach there, mostly plastic debris,
Hmm.
the show. Christopher Baker, who lives in New York, who he's become interested in oysters recently and has done some work about oysters. And so I brought him up to Connecticut and had him meet with Norm Bloom of Norm Bloom and Sons, the big oyster fishery now that has existed in Norwalk for years, but his family was responsible for bringing it back to a certain degree, and he did some work specifically about his experiences with the sound and oysters.
Hmm. It's absolutely fascinating. I really hope I can get down there and see it, and that might happen. We're talking about the possibility of me getting down there to maybe do a talk while the exhibit is happening, right? Maybe this
Well,
summer.
it's up, and the show's up for a long time. It's up until August 28th. The other thing I want to mention, and I don't want to throw a wrench into this, but I'm working and I'm very close to the idea that the show is going to travel to another venue further east on the Sound. I'm not going to
Oh,
reveal where that place is yet because we haven't sealed the deal yet. but
okay.
but
But
it's
it,
a good
yeah.
chance later in the fall it's going to go further east on the Sound, and I'm really excited by that because from the very beginning I thought the show would have some legs and be able to go
Hmm.
somewhere else.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. But as far as being at Norwalk Art Space, it opens June 12th. Is that right?
June 12th. And the opening is free and open to the public, as the Norwalk Art Space is free and
Hmm.
open to the public. I'm really excited by this show. Actually, it's something that I think I'm much fonder of and attached to Long Island Sound than I've ever been in the past, and also more interested in lighthouses.
Well, watch out.
Well, I now the thing is, I'm thinking now that I've experienced it, and one of the things I want to do is perhaps go and stay at Peck's Ledge again. I want to do some work based on the experience being out there. My work as an artist, not as a curator.
Yeah, yeah. I hope you get to do that. So I have one final question for you for bonus points, okay?
Okay.
And that question is, what did you enjoy most about the week you spent at the lighthouse?
I think the thing I remember the most is, or left the biggest impression on me, is getting up like at 3 in the morning and going out on the deck and just experiencing the sound out there quietly. Because I'd been on the sound at boats, but this was different. I wasn't moving. It wasn't moving. I was able to sit there, and I was amazed actually how many more stars you could see just being a mile and a half offshore versus being, a mile. I live about 2 miles from Long Island Sound, and I never would see as many stars in my sky as I would out there.
Sure.
uh, just the sunrises, well, the sunsets were spectacular, but I was more enamored of the sunrises, of seeing the sun, the eastern horizon slowly get light. When the sun came up, the sun would hit the tops of the Northport Power Station smokestacks directly across the Sound on Long Island, and seeing that little gleam of light on the top of them was always a treat in the morning.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds great. I was thinking, as you're talking, I was thinking about how Peck's Ledge wasn't a staffed lighthouse really for that long. I think it was only something like 27
Right.
years. But you and your friend, they were probably spent the longest stretch there since keepers were living there full time, I would guess.
Yeah,
Um,
the only thing is they did have some people there during World War II,
right,
manning
as
it
lookout
for
type
coastal
thing.
defense,
Yeah, yeah,
and that was in the early 1940s. But
yeah.
I'm curious, like if anyone else is, we have no record of anyone else staying out there. I have a hard time believing that no one since the 1940s has stayed out there. I mean,
Yeah.
people have spent nights out there, but did anyone spend a week out there since the 1940s? Probably.
Right. There might have been Coast Guard crews along the line who were doing work there and got stuck because of the seas or weather or something and spent some time, but I doubt that they spent a week there. So,
Or some kids, went out on their sea kayak or something and did manage to climb up the ladder. They couldn't get inside, but maybe they hung out on the deck for a
yeah,
night.
maybe. But anyway, not many people have certainly done that in several decades, stayed there for any length of time. So it's quite unique. And what you're experiencing there with the sunrises and sunsets and the night sky and everything, obviously lighthouse keepers experience that on a regular basis. And I think that was part of the beauty of the job. There are a lot of dangers to it too, of course. I always say lighthouse keeping wasn't as romantic as you think, but they were closer to nature all the time than most of us are.
The funny thing is, like, it's like being on a ship that isn't moving.
Right.
And that being anchored, like the fact that it wasn't moving, because all my experiences being out in the open water have always been on something that's moving. And even if it's a calm day, the boat is bobbing around. And I've been on boats at nighttime, certainly, where I've seen the night sky, but there was something about being out there. And, also the nature of a lighthouse is it's like a panopticon where they're circular or octagonal or hexagonal or whatever, generally, because the idea of being able to see. And I think that was one of the things that interested me about doing the show was it wasn't about the lighthouse, but the idea of the lighthouse looking out at the world and the world looking back at it. It was, it was built to be seen.
Yeah.
Like a work of art in a way. And, the other thing I realized about it is, and this was about all lighthouses when I was out there, is that they're kind of like secular church steeples. There's something spiritual about them. I don't know how to describe.
I agree. I agree.
And also I'm interested in architecture. So the variety of solving this problem of how do you create a tall thing with a light at the top fascinates me. And then the history going back to the lighthouse at Alexandria, the idea of it being one of the seven wonders of the world. Like there are kind of images of the lighthouse of Alexandria, but they're all created like way after the fact. Like, what did the lighthouse of Alexandria really look like? No one knows.
Yeah. You see different drawings, but they all look different from each other. So you're tying a lot of interesting ideas together, and I love it. And I always like the idea of tying art of one kind or another in with lighthouses because I think they lend themselves to
they're inspiration. A lighthouse is an inspirational thing.
Yes.
There are no structures, like I say, you could compare them with church steeples, perhaps. And, the other thing, being aware of the other tall things along the Sound are these smokestacks from power plants. And just the giant smokestack in Bridgeport, which you could see for miles around. In September, it's going to be imploded.
Oh.
They're cleaning that. They decommission that power plant like all the coal-fired, oil-fired plants, and they're going to clean up the site and create housing there, evidently. But I'm gonna try to go to the implosion. It's going to be probably pretty spectacular.
Yeah, sounds like fun. But I'm actually glad to hear that's on its way out. Yeah. So on that note, this is just fascinating. Richard Klein, artist and curator. It's just great speaking with you. It was nice meeting you last year when I visited Pecks Lighthouse, and great getting to talk with you today. And hopefully, I hope to see you this summer, maybe at Norwalk Art Space.
We're working on that. I'll keep you informed about that idea, bringing you down. Right. So, and it's fascinating to talk to you, and you've given me a lot of insight. And actually, the conversation we had when you visited Pecks Ledge last summer was, influenced my writing, actually.
Well, that's nice. That's nice to hear. But again, wonderful talking with you today. I'm sure this conversation will continue. I appreciate you being on the podcast. Thanks so much, Richard.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Again, the exhibition, Sight and Sound, Artists Consider Long Island Sound, opens June 12th and continues through August 28th. Check out the Norwalk Art Space website at the norwalkartspace.org for more information. And, of course, be sure to check out uslhs.org for information on everything the U.S. Lighthouse Society does, from preservation grants to the Passport Program to tours around the world. We'll be back next week with a discussion of the effects of climate change on Maine's lighthouses. For now, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and keep a good light.
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.